So I think this is a big piece of evidence. I do think they're going to extensively search that area, and I am very hopeful that they will get a body.
Emerge in the case of Lynette Hooker after authorities say her husband, Brian Hooker, appears to have given inaccurate information of her last known whereabouts.
His own devices turned on him. Not a witness, not a neighbor, not a tip line caller. The evidence that changed this entire investigation came from the phone and apps Brian Hooker carried onto that water himself. Federal investigators now have two versions of the night Lynette Hooker disappeared. One version came from Brian's mouth. The other version came from his own technology. And according to officials familiar with this investigation, those two versions do not match. Stay with us, because by the time this video ends, you're going to understand exactly what those devices recorded and why federal agents seized an entire sailboat over it. There's also a piece of equipment aboard that vessel that most people haven't talked about yet. A system that doesn't need daylight, a system that records heat instead of light. We're going to get there. But first, understand who we're talking about. Lynette Hooker was not someone who stumbled into life on the water. She spent years building toward it. She and Brian sold their ordinary life, bought a sailboat named the Soulmate, and disappeared into the ocean. Video after video showed them working side by side, painting decks, crossing open water, living the dream most people only describe at dinner tables. One clip showed Lynette smiling as they finally left Texas. "We're finally leaving," she said. She looked like someone starting the best chapter of her life. That boat was called Soulmate. She never made it back to it. April 4, 2025, Hopetown, Abacos, Bahamas. A short dinghy ride back to their boat, routine, until 9:29 p.m. When the Soulmate vanished from every maritime tracking system on Earth. If you're following this case, subscribe right now. We cover every development the moment it breaks. Before investigators had devices, before they had data, they had one account. One man's version of what happened on that water. And for a while, it was all anyone had. Here is what Brian Hooker told investigators. He and Lynette left Hopetown around 7:30 that evening. The water was rough, wind was picking up. They were in a small dinghy, just 8 feet long, heading back to the Soulmate anchored offshore. Then Lynette went into the water. Brian says she fell overboard. He says she was carrying the dinghy's ignition key when she went in. He says when she disappeared beneath the surface, the key disappeared with her. No key meant no engine. No engine meant no ability to chase her through dark water. He says he tried. He says he paddled manually. He says the wind and current kept pulling them apart until he couldn't see her anymore. Eventually, he made his way to Marsh Harbor, arriving in the early hours of April 5th. At first, that account held. It sounded like a maritime tragedy, the kind that happens fast and leaves no witnesses. But investigators were already looking at something that didn't fit. You need to understand what AIS is. The Automatic Identification System is a vessel's digital heartbeat. It broadcasts position, speed, direction, continuously and automatically. Shore stations record it. Maritime tracking networks archive it. It was built specifically for dark water, rough conditions, limited visibility, the exact conditions Brian described. At 9:29 p.m., the Soulmate's AIS signal stopped transmitting. It stayed dark for 11 hours and 11 minutes. Federal prosecutor Tad DeBasi, a man who built his career prosecuting cases where no body was ever recovered, reviewed the publicly available evidence and reached a direct conclusion. He described the AIS blackout as suspicious, specifically because it occurred during the most critical period of the entire investigation. The signal didn't fail during a routine night. It failed during the exact hours investigators needed most. And the AIS blackout, as serious as it was, turned out to be the smallest piece of this puzzle. The AIS went dark for 11 hours, but Brian Hooker's own devices didn't. They kept recording, and what they captured created a second version of that night that investigators could not ignore. Here's what most people don't understand about marine navigation apps. You don't have to create a route for them to record one. You don't have to press save. You don't have to do anything. These applications run in the background automatically, generating a silent, continuous breadcrumb trail of every place your device has been. The user doesn't control it. The user often doesn't even know it's happening. Brian Hooker had one of these apps on his device. And according to CBS News reporting, federal investigators extracted that location data. What they found stopped the investigation cold. According to officials familiar with the case, the recorded movements showed the device traveling through the Sea of Abaco, stopping, and later returning to shore. That alone might mean nothing. But investigators compared that recorded route against the maps Brian had already provided to authorities. They did not match. Let that settle for a second, because here is what that means in practice. Investigators were no longer comparing one witness statement against another witness statement. They were comparing a human account against machine data. Data that recorded automatically, data that had no reason to lie, data that existed before anyone knew it would ever matter. This is what investigators call the gap between a reported timeline and a verifiable timeline. When those two things diverge, investigators don't pick the one they like. They stress test both. They pull every independent source. They cross-reference every coordinate. Here is what they had by this point: an account from the husband, an AIS blackout during the most important hours, GPS data that contradicted the maps he provided, a device that kept recording after the tracking system went dark, location data showing movement through the exact waters where Lynette disappeared, and not a single independent source that fully supported the reported version of events. The ocean doesn't have street cameras. It doesn't have traffic records or pedestrian witnesses. In maritime investigations, device data is often the only objective witness that survives the night. This case now had two witnesses, one human, one machine. They told different stories. Which do you trust more, his account or what the device recorded? Drop your read in the comments. Investigators had two competing timelines and a vessel at the center of both. So they did exactly what federal investigators do. When all the evidence points back to one location, they took the boat. In early May, federal investigators seized the Soulmate. This was not a walkthrough. This was not a precautionary step. Authorities physically transferred the vessel to a facility equipped for advanced forensic examination. That decision tells you everything about where this investigation stood. Most people still picture sailboats as mechanical things: ropes, sails, wind. The Soulmate was not that. It was a floating data center, navigation systems, GPS logs, communication records, electronic storage across multiple devices. Systems that generate records automatically, the same way Brian's navigation app did, whether anyone intends them to or not. Investigators weren't asking the boat what happened. They were asking its systems. And then there was the camera. The Soulmate was equipped with a FLIR system, forward-looking infrared. This is thermal imaging technology. It does not record light. It records heat. Every object on the water emits a heat signature. Vessels emit heat. And human bodies emit heat, especially against cold, dark water. A FLIR system, if it was running that night, would not have needed daylight. It would not have needed a clear sky. It would have recorded whatever entered its field of view, regardless of what the human eye could see. Federal investigators considered that camera significant enough to include in their formal forensic review. No footage has been released publicly. No analysis has been confirmed. But the fact that investigators prioritized it tells you what they believed it might contain. They also requested DNA reference samples from Lynette's family, standard for potential recovery identification, but a signal of how far this had escalated. And they sought authorization for underwater searches near Elbow Cay and Hopetown, searches driven by evidence analysis, not guesswork. Subscribe to CrimeNest TV. Every development in this case gets covered the moment it surfaces. Do you think the FLIR camera captured something that night? Or has the critical evidence already been found, just not released yet? Tell me below. 5 layers of evidence. One vessel, one timeline with an 11-hour hole in it. And one question that hasn't changed since April 4th, what actually happened during those missing hours? Strip this case all the way back. 2 people left shore together, 1 came back. That is where this started. And despite everything, the device data, the AIS blackout, the GPS discrepancy, the vessel seizure, the FLIR camera, the underwater searches, that is still where this case sits. The 11-hour gap has not been filled. The Soulmate went dark at 9:29 p.m. on April 4th and didn't reappear on tracking systems until 8:40 the following morning. What happened inside those hours, where the vessel went, what its systems recorded, what the thermal camera may have captured, none of that has been officially confirmed. What has been confirmed is the pattern. Every independent source investigators pulled pointed back to the same vessel, the same night, the same window of time. Brian Hooker's account has not changed, but the evidence around it has continued to grow. Lynette Hooker was a woman who built her life on that water. She deserves a real answer. Her family deserves a real answer. And right now, somewhere inside an FBI forensic lab, investigators are still trying to build one, device record by device record, coordinate by coordinate. What do you believe happened during those 11 hours? Tell me in the comments. Keep it focused on the evidence. This case is not closed. We're not done covering it. Share this video. Subscribe to Crime Nest TV. And when this investigation breaks, you'll hear it here first.